define education for me, and what role does it play in modern society?
Gosh, okay. So that is, in one hand, that could be a really simple question, or it could be the most complicated question. And I think often I'd meet people from, a business world or other worlds who said, oh, yeah, education's really easy. You just have to do A, or you have to do B, or you have to do C. And I often would give speeches where I'd give examples of people throughout history of what they felt education was important, whether it was Cicero, or whether it was ancient Israel and the Talmud, or whether it was Confucius, or whether it was. And what was just interesting is for thousands of years, the greatest minds throughout the world have debated and disagreed on what is education and what is the purpose of education. So there is no easy answer. Anyone who tells you there's an easy answer is wrong. And in the end, it's whatever a certain society believes is important for education. And it really is around societal norms, what you need from a great education. So I'm not going to give you an easy answer because I don't think there is one. I think our society, with the norms we would say to have a great education, is to function in modern British society. And, that partly means being able to hold down a good job, hold down a job, raise a family, being able to function in society, being able to have, even some British values, I think people would say are an important part of education. So that obviously means you have to be highly literate, you have to be highly numerate, you have to have certain knowledge, you have to have certain skills. And that's what we, I think, as a British society, have believed is a good education. But that's something that's very different in different societies and at different points in history.
Would you be able to give me sort of like maybe the most positive aspect and the most negative aspect of the education system in the UK right now?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to start with the glass half full, in that the education system in the UK is much better now than it was 20 years ago. And I think everyone needs to recognize that. And sometimes we can be down on ourselves a bit too much.
I've heard you say in the past that the disparity of education in the UK is the biggest civil rights issue of our time. We've talked about how we got here, but how optimistic are you about the future of this in the UK?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are other civil rights issues that I'm probably less qualified to talk about. But it seems to me just a basic, if there's schools in the country that you wouldn't want your children to go to, but other parents are forced to send their kids there, then those children do not have the same civil rights as your children. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
If all children don't have access to the same outstanding education, then some children are getting a massive leg up in life and others aren't. And I think it is a civil rights issue, and people don't pay enough attention to the civil rights aspect of that. I think, that you are disadvantaging a whole swath of children for the rest of their life, basically because of where they were born and where they live. And, to me, that's a massive civil rights issue. I was feeling, if you had asked me a few years ago, I would say I was feeling things were improving, though slowly. And I think one of the things that was exciting was over a 10-year period, you started seeing non-selective schools in disadvantaged areas showing the same results as schools in more advantaged areas, And for a while there, I visited schools where they'd say, look, if we had any smart kids in this school, we'd send them to a private school and give them a scholarship, or send them to a grammar school, and it would be that sort of really awful attitude that was really depressing. Now I think that's a different attitude, and we could say actually you can do well in a school in a disadvantaged circumstance, and you can get good results, because there's some outstanding educators there, and I think a number of schools have really proven what's possible. And I think there have been some improvements in some of the changes, some of the academies and some of the other improvements over the last 20 years have helped things. The last few years, I would say things have begun to turn down in a way that really worries me. So the gap was decreasing. So I started something called the Fair Education Alliance that I'm on the board of. And we set 5 goals for a 20-year period, which were 5 gaps that exist between children, young people from disadvantaged families and wealthier families, around GCSE results, university results, like jobs, happiness, and primary school SATs. And these gaps were getting smaller and smaller. And then we've seen over the last few years, they started to grow again. And I think COVID had a big part of that. I think, I don't know if there's enough of a push with the current government on continuing to close the gap. And I think we did have a 10-year period where we had people like Andrew Adonis and, people agree or disagree with Michael Gove, but we had serious people, I think, in education who were really focused on closing that gap. And I don't know if there's been that focus over the last 5 years or so. And I think COVID has really hurt things because, the kids from from less advantaged backgrounds were really, really hurt by COVID in a really serious way
Yeah,
that I think we're only beginning to come to terms with.
sure. What do you envisage the medium to long term impact of that will be to that age group,
I mean, I think
Brett?
it'll be pretty massive for a lot of. I don't think as a country we've come to terms yet with how big an effect that's going to have on a lot of children and teenagers who have been through that. I think for those of us who are lucky enough to have, good broadband, lots of laptops, all the children have their own bedrooms and their own space, you know, our children had an effect. I mean, I know my children, there was a negative effect of all the lockdowns.
Yeah,
Um, but it was nothing compared to lots of young people who literally missed 2 years of school completely and will never get that back, and
sure.
already we're living with a gap, that existed. So, I mean, I know lots of children, in the schools that Teach First works in, most of whom would not have their own bedroom, for instance, or
Yeah,
many of whom wouldn't have good broadband, much less, even a laptop, even if they do get one from school. Some of the structural problems they had over the last few years were just massive. And, I think a
sure.
lot of schools are seeing that since lockdowns ended.
Could you just give us a little bit of an overview in terms of your motivation for setting up Tiny and what sort of the purpose of the organization and the problem you're trying to solve?
Sure. So it was basically by just over 15 years visiting lots of schools and realizing lots of children, secondary schools are important and great educators can have a huge difference in secondary schools. Then we started working in primary schools and we realized, a lot of kids, by the time they're in year 7, already they're underachieving or a massive gap exists that's difficult to close. But more and more, a lot of our teachers were saying, look, even in year 1, year 2, year 3, children were unable to communicate, unable to play. That combined with the fact that there's been so much new neuroscience over the last decade, some really big knowledge increase around how brains are developed at a young age that really
Sure.
shows the importance of a good early years education base at age, even 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Mm,
And how that sets you up for the rest of your life and how that sets you up with enabling you to learn more the rest of your life.
sure.
I think there's no question that most societies, including ours, under resources early years education. So in my mind, how can the problem with early years education is all about supply, just like teaching and Teach First. How can we get an additional supply of outstanding early years educators into there? And to
Mm,
do that, I think you need to pay them a professional salary. So they should be earning £30,000 or so a year, maybe more. They should have that flexibility to do it, while taking care of their own children, which is a concern of many of them. And they should feel part of a professional community, and it should just be easy for them. Like they should just be able to focus on educating and on the children in their care. But I think it's not that difficult to do in childminding, which is basically small nurseries people run in their homes. And what I saw was that childminding is something that feels very old-fashioned, and it was ready for a refresh and a rebrand.
yeah.
And it's a great job. To me, it fits with like the whole Airbnb, Uber, like the way, many people want to work, about using their resources twice, using, their
Yeah.
house or their car in a different way, and actually taking home most of the income for that. So
Sure.
what we try to build is a tech-based way for people to open up these small nurseries in their homes, operate as childminders in a very easy way,
Yeah.
and
Sounds
make a
amazing. Yeah.
professional salary that way.